Okay, so imagine you commit your code to GitHub and that automatically triggers the build, test, packaging, and then finally the deployment process into production on Azure within a matter of minutes. Sounds good, doesn't it? So that's exactly what you're going to learn today in this video, completely step by step, as I take you through Azure DevOps Pipelines. Well, hello again, wherever you are, whenever you are. Where am I? In Melbourne, Australia, as usual. I have to think about that. And when am I? It's March 2019. So I hope you're happy and well wherever you happen to be. We've got a lot to get through in today's video, so I'm going to get cracking on. Just say, if you like the video, give it a like. And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the channel. And remember to click the little notification bell icon and you'll get notified whenever I put up any new videos. Other than that, lots to do, so let's get started. Okay, let's get into this. So yeah, this is a step-by-step into building and deploying a REST API with Azure DevOps. So when done, you'll understand what is a CI/CD pipeline, what is Azure DevOps and some alternatives, how to connect GitHub and Azure to Azure DevOps, it's a bit of a mouthful, how to configure Azure DevOps Pipelines, which is really the main part of the tutorial of this video, and then how to continuously deploy to Azure, which is, I guess, really included in that last point. And what you'll need to follow along with this video, if you want to do that, you can just watch it. Obviously, you'll need a text editor. I'd recommend VS Code, .NET Core SDK installed on your workstation, Postman, or really, to be honest with you, a web browser is fine just to test the API, and GitHub, Azure and Azure DevOps accounts, which are all free for individual signups. There are some paid plans, obviously, but we'll cover those where they're relevant later on as we move through the video, and about 30 minutes of your time. Now, it would be advantageous if you know about some of these things, because I can't cover them in detail as part of this video. Just don't have the time. So unit testing, Git, .NET Core development and Azure. Don't worry, the video is completely step by step, so I don't skip anything. You can follow it along even if you don't know any of that stuff. But for example, Git is, in my view, quite a big subject, and if you've never touched it before, then you may want to do a bit of side reading on exactly what it is. But don't worry, we cover it all step by step here, just can't go into the detail, okay? You will forgive me, otherwise the video is going to be about 5 hours long, don't have the time. So, what is CI/CD? Well, it stands for continuous integration, continuous delivery, most usually, but you may also hear people use the term continuous deployment. So as it says on the screen there, or shows you on the screen, they are the kind of steps in a kind of pipeline almost, depicting on what continuous integration and continuous delivery and continuous deployment are. So continuous integration is really the art or the practice of multiple developers committing code to a branch and having that code built and tested to ensure that the build in the code branch remains healthy. So you've got multiple contributors making sure they don't break the code base. Basically, that's what continuous integration is, and it involves building and testing your code base. So we will cover that in this video. Continuous delivery is the next bit in the pipeline, or the next bit in the chain, and it really is talking about taking that build, that successful build, and packaging it ready to be deployed into production. Now, we don't actually deploy it all the way into production, it's just literally ready to deploy at the touch of a button. And then finally, continuous deployment is taking it that one step further, where you actually, there is no manual intervention from the point where you commit code to your repository. The pipeline will run and it will deploy all the way through to production. Now, there's not that many organizations, or there's certainly fewer organizations that practice that, mainly because business and IT remain relatively separate beasts, and IT are responsible for the build and the packaging, and it's not ultimately their decision to release software into production. That's a business decision. So very few organizations are at that level of maturity where they're confident enough to deploy all the way through to production. So most organizations take it to the point of continuous delivery, and then there's some manual process where the green light is given to deploy into production. So that's the difference. Now in terms of this video, we're actually going to be doing continuous deployment. So we're going to ultimately commit code changes to Git, and that's going to filter all the way through our pipeline, and ultimately will end up resulting in live code being deployed onto Azure. So it's pretty exciting. Here's a depiction of the full of the full CI/CD pipeline, and it's taking you all the way through from planning what you're going to build all the way through to monitoring it when it's released into production. You may also see it depicted as an infinite loop. If you're getting into DevOps, that's often a diagram that you will see thrown around quite a lot. In terms of what we're going to be focusing on in terms of our pipeline in this video, we're going to be looking at coding, building, testing, releasing, and deploying. We're going to be setting up some sample code projects, but they're really just going to be the template projects that you get with .NET. We're going to be doing very little actual coding as part of the code part of the pipeline. We will then be committing those changes to Git and GitHub, and then Azure DevOps takes over. So actually, the next slide shows you this in a bit more clarity. So when we talk about coding, yes, obviously we're talking about the practice of writing code, but we're also, in terms of our build pipeline or our CI/CD pipeline, we're talking about the code repository. So where you actually put that code as part of your continuous integration process kicking off. And committing code to GitHub is basically going to be our trigger to start the pipeline, and that's where Azure DevOps takes over, and it's going to build our code base, it's going to run our unit tests, it's then going to package it ready for release, and then it's ultimately going to deploy it to Azure. Now, just a word, Azure DevOps also has a repository feature. We'll show you that in a bit. We're not really covering it in much detail here, but technically Azure DevOps could do everything from the code all the way through to the release, or the repository all the way through to the release, with Azure still as our cloud platform. And then just to give you some point of reference, there are different code repositories available. GitLabs I've put there. There's also Bitbucket. In terms of build servers, I've put Circle CI up there. There's other ones like Jenkins or Worker. There's a whole raft of them. And obviously there's a multitude of cloud platforms. Amazon's probably the other big player aside from Azure. I suppose you have Google Cloud, but it doesn't seem to be as strong as Amazon and Microsoft in the cloud space. And you can even, if you really want to get into more detail, each one of those components, build, test and release, there's also specialized technologies that will deal with each one of those segments. We're not going to delve into that detail here. So, done enough talking. Let's get on with the video. Alright, so I'm going to start VS Code, and I'm going to use the terminal within VS Code just because I like it. It kind of follows the Linux kind of syntax. So just change into your working directory. I can type, that would be good. And VS Code, okay. So first of all, we're going to create our solution directory. And we'll call it simple API solution. So that's going to contain our two solution projects. One's going to be our REST API, one's going to be our XUnit project. So let's change into that folder, and within that folder we're going to create two other folders, one called SRC for source, and the other one will be test for our test project. So do a little directory listing. I'm using ls command, which is a Linux command. If you're using a Windows command line, use dir. So cool, we've got both those projects, both those folders set up. Now, just in case you're interested, I do have an article on my blog. I promise this is the last time I will try and push this down your throat, and it does actually have instructions on here that I'm effectively going through now, and it goes through the directory structure and how to build what we're going to build. So if you'd rather do that, you can do that. Obviously, I know some of you prefer videos, so let's keep going with that. So we're going to change into our source directory, and we're actually going to scaffold a new project, so .NET new. Before we do that, if you just do .NET -- version, it will tell us what version we're using. So at the time I'm making this video, the version's 2.2. If you get an error there, then you haven't installed the .NET Core framework. So just Google install .NET Core and follow the instructions. If you're doing it on Linux, I've got a video on how to do it on Ubuntu Linux. Anyway, back to what we're trying to do. So up key, I didn't actually execute it, that's why it's not there. So .NET new. And then what type of project do we want? We want a web API project. Again, the last video I did was on web API, so if you want a lot of detail on how they work, look at that video. We're just going to use the scaffolded code, so .NET new web API will go away and create a project for us. Wonderful. Now, if we actually change into the source directory, we were already in there, weren't we? It created a folder called Simple API after the name of the project. And if you change into that, you'll see there's a whole raft of files and folders in there. And if you want, we can do .NET build. I don't know what I was doing there, .NET build. To build it. And it should hopefully build okay. It'd be quite scary if it didn't. So let's change back into our solution directory, do a listing again. So we're back in our solution root. This time we're going to change into our test folder, doing a directory listing, there's nothing in it. And in a similar way, we're going to scaffold our XUnit project. So .NET new project. In fact, if you just do .NET new, it will give you a list of the different project types you can create. So we're just going to do .NET new XUnit, and then the name we're going to give it is simple API.tests. So the name of the project is basically exactly the same as the name of the project we created previously with a .test prefix. That's kind of standard naming convention for your unit testing project. So let's just do .NET build in that as well. It should build okay. Well, we're not in the folder, so we didn't actually change into the folder. So let's change into the folder list. There's our project there, and if you do .NET build, it should build. And if you do .NET test, it will actually run the unit tests in there. And it says there's one test in here that's basically an empty test, but we will come on to that in a minute. Now, change back up to your root solution directory. So directory listing, we're back at the top. We have our two projects created. What we want to do now is create a solution file that basically ties the two projects together. Now this is really there's a couple of reasons why you would use it. One, if you're using Visual Studio, it will like a solution file. And the other one, I'll show you in a minute why I like to have a solution file. So to create a solution file, you simply type .NET new sln name, and we'll call it simple API sln, and that should create a template solution file. So if we do a listing now, we have our two folders and we have the simple API solution file. Now what we need to do now is actually add our two project references into this file. So this is a bit of a long command line, so I might speed this up. So basically what this was doing, we were adding these two projects to our solution file. Now the last thing we have to do is we need to add a reference to our API project inside our testing project. So basically our unit test project is going to test our API project. Now in order to do that, it needs to know about it. So we need to add a reference to our API project inside our unit test CS proj file. So in order to do, you can manually edit the test project's CS proj file if you want, or you can use the command line. So we're going to do that now. Okay, so what we can do then is we can then open a folder. We'll open our solution folder. And what this will do is open our solution. So if we go into our test project, here is the CS proj file. You should see a reference here to our API project. Fantastic. Okay, so one of the things I just wanted to show you before we move on is if we get our terminal back up, and if we type .NET build, we're in our main solution root folder. If we type .NET build, because we created the solution, that will actually go off and build our two projects, which is great. Now we've already tested our XUnit project by doing .NET test. We just want to test that our main API project actually runs before we go any further. So let's change into that folder. Didn't need the asterisk there. And change into the main folder. And if we do .NET run, that will run our API, and it's started on either one of these. Let's take the non-secure one. Actually, let's take the secure one because it will redirect us. Control C then, and I think I've got Postman running. No, I don't. Let's get Postman up. Yeah, you can just paste that into a web browser as well if you like, but we'll use Postman and paste that in here. And then the full path to one of our action methods is API values. So if you actually pop back to our main API project and go into the controller, we can see here the paths to the various action methods. Not going to go into much more detail. If that doesn't make any sense, watch my previous video. There we go. So we've done a GET request to this URL here, and it's returned back value 1 and value 2. If we change the signature, it's returning back something else. That number can be anything, that can be arbitrary. There you go. And so basically that is calling this method here. Okay, cool. So that all looks like it's working. So Control C to stop our server from running. Okay, so what we want to do now is pop over to our unit testing class, and we're going to actually create a test that tests let's see what we test. We'll test this action method here. We'll see and check to see what it returns, and we'll unit test that and we'll see what we get. So let's go over to our unit test project, go into here, and we'll create a new test within here. Now, again, this is not a video on unit testing, so you typically create a new class for a new suite of tests that you wanted to implement, but I'm just going to put it in here for quickness. So the first thing we want to do is we want to add a using directive at the top and make reference to our controllers folder. So we want to make reference to basically what's contained in here. And then within our class, we're going to create a values controller object. You can spell it correctly, that we're going to test against. So we will create a fact, which is basically effectively our test. We'll create a test method, and we'll give it a verbose name. We'll say get returns my name. So you typically name your test what you expect the positive result to be, if you like. So we're going to create a return value, and we're going to make that equal to whatever our controller's get method returns. Now in here we're just going to arbitrarily pass in any integer. It doesn't really matter what that is bringing back, or what that number is. And then it's complaining. I know why that's failing. We'll come on to that in a minute. And then we'll assert equal, put my name in, is equal to the return value. Okay. So basically what this is saying is we're creating a new controller that's based on our API controller. We're calling a new method that's effectively our test. We are putting into this return value variable whatever our controller's get method returns, and we're just passing in an arbitrary one, and then we're asserting that that value is equal to a string which happens to be in my name. Now, this is complaining. I know why it's complaining, but let's just jump in here and clear this, and we will move into our, let's move up to our solution directory, move into test, move into our directory, and we'll do a .NET build. It's building okay, and we'll do a .NET test. This should fail. Actually, we'll save that, and we'll save this. Let's just try that again, see if the build fails. Yeah, you get an error. So, because we hadn't saved the file and blah, 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 and basically what it's saying is that we have a missing reference to this Microsoft ASP .NET Core MVC. So we'll just copy that. And what we'll do in our unit test project, we will simply add a package reference to this package here. And in fact, we can be a bit cheeky, and we can just copy whatever is in our REST API project. So let's just copy this, and we'll put it into here. Save that off. It's just saying we had some dependencies, so it'll go away and do those for us. Fantastic. And if we go back here, I will bet this should build. We have one error. What is the problem here? Okay. You haven't capitalized that. Don't you just love... Okay, there we go. So it's all passing. So I had a small character there, which my fault. And also the unit test project didn't have a reference to ASP .NET Core, so it was throwing up an error. So if we then run our tests now, so we're in our unit test project, .NET test, we should have two tests. We do. And the test run failed, which is what we'd expect. So we have a total of two tests, one passed, which is our empty test, and one failed. Now the main reason it failed was we're expecting this return value, when in fact if we jump over to our controller, it's returning this. So it's a very simple fix. we'll return this from our code. Now, I appreciate this is a very simplistic test, but we're testing what we expect to get back from our controller. We're just hard coding the values in, but it's a valid use case. And I just wanted to demonstrate in terms of CI/CD pipelines how unit testing plays in that. So we've saved that off. Let's run it again. There we go. So we've got a total of 2 tests, 2 have passed, 0 have failed. It's all green. Life is good. So you'll be pleased to hear we've set up our code projects. We're going to, basically that's it. We're going to tinker with them ever so slightly, but that's basically that set up. So you won't have to watch me do too much more typing. I'm sure you'll be very pleased to hear. So next what we're going to do is talk about source control. So we're basically going to put our solution that we've just created, we're going to put it under source control, and we're going to use Git to do that. So we're actually going to do a little bit more typing, but not that verbose. So back to our command line, and let's change into our main solution directory. Do a clear of the screen and do a quick listing just to check that we're there. So should be fairly familiar to you. We've got our source test folders and our solution file. You'll also see there's a .vs code folder. That's just for the VS Code config. So bear that in mind in just 1 second. So Git, not going to go into too much detail about what Git is, but basically it's a version control solution that's used basically used everywhere. So we're going to use Git, and then we're going to use GitHub as our cloud version. So first of all, type Git at the command line, -- version, just to make sure it's Vestian version. And I've got 2.15 installed. That's fine. If you get an error message, then you'll need to install Git. You'll have to Google how to do that. It's pretty straightforward. Again, my video on setting up a Linux .NET Core box takes you through that for Ubuntu. So we're in our solution directory. What we want to do is initiate our Git repository. So it's very simple. It's git init. If we spell it right, git init. There we go. And what that does is, you can see here, boom, straight away VS Code has actually responded to that, and it's changed colours, and we've got 64 files that are pending some changes. So very good. The next command you'll want to do is a git status. And these files have not been yet added to our source repository. Now, before we do that, there are certain files that you do not want to place under source control. So what you will do there is you will create a gitignore file. So you will do a new file called gitignore. And basically it's a file that's just going to tell Git there are certain things you ignore. Now, I am definitely not going to type this in because it would drive you absolutely insane. So back over to the blog, I have provided a sample gitignore file that I am just going to copy and paste from, and I'm going to paste it into my gitignore file here. There you go, and we'll just save that off. So that's I hate cutting and pasting. I like doing things step by step, but for something like that, there's no way on earth I would type that out. So you're more than welcome to use that. There's other ones available that you can use. So we've got a gitignore file. We have initialized our Git repository. There is a hidden folder now within your solution folder called .git that contains all the tracking information. That can get quite big, so just be warned on that. So we want to now add our files and folders under Git control. So we'll do a git add dot to add everything. You don't need to do git status, by the way. I just like to do that to see how things are tracking. Great. And then finally, we do a git commit. So it's a two-stage commit process. We'll use the -m switch to put a little message in, and we'll just say initial commit. And do a git status again. And it will say here, there's nothing to commit. We've got a working clean tree on our master branch. Now again, you've not used Git before, that makes no sense to you. you're going to have to go away and do a little bit of reading. But basically, it's a two-stage commit process: git add, git commit. Great. So we've just set up Git locally on our workstation. That's wonderful, and you can actually set up Git as part of a wider team and set up your own Git servers and all that stuff. That's wonderful, but what we're going to use and what we need to use, or recommend that we use as part of using Azure DevOps, is use GitHub. Now, GitHub is basically a cloud Git solution, as I mentioned at the start. So what we need to do now is let's go over to GitHub. So here's my GitHub page. github.com. If you've not got an account, just sign up for one. Now, all the projects I've done previously for my other videos are on here. I'm going to create a new repository to hold this project. So click on new, and I'll give it a name. I'll call it Simple API. And we're going to make it public. Remember that a bit later, but we'll keep it public, that's fine, and we'll just create a repository. Cool. Now this is actually the home page of this repository. Now, because there's no code there, which we will rectify in a minute, it gives us some instructions about how to basically use this repository. Now, this set of instructions here is you can create a new repository at the command line. These commands here should be very familiar to you because I've just done these on our workstation, so we don't need to do these git init, git add, and git commit steps. We simply need to do these steps here, which is pushing an existing repository to the command line. So I'll copy this one as well. I lied, I'm doing a little bit more copying. Let's paste that in there. Now all that's doing is it's saying we're adding a remote repository, which is the GitHub repository we've just created as part of our Git solution. So that's all it's doing, it's just creating a pointer. And then finally, all we need to do, I really shouldn't copy this, but I will, is actually, let's not do that. Let's type it. So let me just type that in, git push u origin master. Now we'll be using this command an awful lot throughout the rest of the tutorial. And basically it's taking our local Git repository, pushing it up to the cloud. Now, quick sidebar, if you're using Windows and you get like an authentication error here, then you're going to have to update, let me just get the name of it, it's called something like Windows Git Authenticator. Let me just get that for you. Anyway, you can see here that we have pushed up our code to our GitHub repository. So if we move back over to GitHub and we refresh this, you will actually see our code project has been pushed up to the cloud. And you'll also see that there is no VS Code folder being pushed up because I'm going to presume at this stage that it was part of the ignore files that we had in our git ignore. Very good. Okay, so we can even drill down here and you can basically see our project. So that's wonderful. Our code is now available on GitHub. So now we want to move over, drum roll please, we want to move over to Azure DevOps. Finally, he says, finally you say. Okay, and you can simply find it at dev.azure.com. If you don't have an account, create one, they're free. Now I've got a couple of projects already here. We're not going to touch those, we're going to create a new project. If you've just signed up, your homepage will look slightly different, but ultimately you'll have a create button, create project button on your homepage. So create project, we'll give it a name. Let's call it Simple API 2, since I've already got one there already. Now, remember when we selected when we created our Git repository, it wasn't that long ago, so you should remember, and we could choose whether it's public or private. You need to make sure the visibility here is the same. You can't have a private Azure DevOps project and a public GitHub project. So we need to make sure they are the same. Just in advanced, make sure your version control, which it defaults to Git, is set to Git, and the work item process is Agile. That is not going to be used as part of this project, this video. So it goes off and it creates a new project for us right now. Here we go, simple API 2. Now there is a dashboard or a list of things you can do down the side here. We are only going to be dealing with the pipeline section. Here I mentioned there's a repo piece of functionality within Azure DevOps that you can actually push your code to if you want, but we are using GitHub instead, so that's all good. So we're only using pipelines, so let's click on pipelines. Now the first pipeline we want to build or create is a build pipeline. So we have no pipelines at all, so let's create a new pipeline. Now the first question I ask you is, where's your code? There you go, you could select it from Azure repos. We are going to select GitHub. Now I've already linked my Azure DevOps account to my GitHub account. The first time you're doing this, you will probably get some, when you click on my code is in GitHub, you'll get some challenge response to enter your credentials for your GitHub account so that Azure DevOps can authenticate. Because I've already done it, I don't want to undo it. It's very, very simple. There's not much to it at all. You just have to put in your username and password, but you will get that challenge the first time you do it. Because I've already done it, it's brought back all my repositories, which should look quite familiar to you, if you remember what was on my GitHub page. So we're going to select our simple API repository. And Azure DevOps goes away, as you can see here, and it kind of parses the solution and it looks to see what is it, and it suggests some pipelines that you may want to use off the shelf. So fantastic, ASP.NET Core, that's what it's recommending. I'm all good with that, so we'll select that. Now, azure-pipelines.yml or YAML, as I will now refer to it. If you're going to take something away from this video, take away Azure Pipelines YAML. This was the thing that consumed most of my time preparing for this video. It's not difficult, but it can be a bit fiddly, it can be a bit finicky, and if something's going to trip you up, this is what will trip you up. So this is the core thing that we're really going to be concentrating on, and all it is in terms of your build pipeline are the steps that you want to perform as part of your build pipeline. Now, the only one you really need to look at here, the others are fairly self-explanatory, is this first step here, which is really just a .NET build command, as if you were running it at the command line, and it's building a release version. And the display name is just for a verbose output, as you'll see in a minute. So that's all it's doing at this point in time. It's going to take that code and it's going to build it. It's not going to test it, it's not going to package it, it's just going to build it. So let's save and run that. Before we do, it's prompting us to say, where do you want to put this Azure Pipelines YAML file? Now it's saying you can create a new branch or you can commit it directly to the master branch, which is what we're going to do. So save and run. Remember that, because it comes back to bite us in a little bit. So that goes away and actually kicks off the pipeline. The pipeline is now going to start to run. We've manually configured it. It's not been automatically triggered yet. We'll come on to that in a bit. So you can see here on the screen, it's finding an agent to actually execute the pipeline. It's got one, and the agent is going to start working on our build. And you'll see the steps executing in the YAML file as it moves through. And you can see here it's doing the .NET build release, which is the verbose output that I was talking about. And it just gives you some details on what that is. Okay, so you can see here that the pipeline has completed, and here are the various steps that it has gone through in order to complete the build. One thing I will just show you, if we jump back over to GitHub, and we go back to let's go to our repositories, and we click on this, what you'll actually see is that it has added Azure Pipelines YAML to that repository. Bear that in mind in in a minute. Now, so what we've basically done is, if you go back to click on builds here, you can see we have one build pipeline and one successful execution of that build pipeline, which is fantastic, but it was manually triggered. So if we then click on this pipeline again and do edit pipeline, and that brings up our YAML file again, but I just want to show you this triggers section here, and this tells us what will trigger the pipeline. And basically one of the triggers at the moment is anything that's committed to GitHub, this repository here, will trigger the continuous integration activity and the build pipeline will kick off. So let's test that theory. Let's just select our builds pipeline again, minimize that, and let's go back to our code base. Let's go into our API project and we will select the startup class. Now I'm just going to take this out, not necessarily suggesting this is a great thing to do, but I'm just going to take it out anyway, just to invoke a change within our code. We'll save that. All that was doing was enforcing HTTPS redirection. So let's do git status. And we can see here that there is one file that's been modified. That is our startup file. Fine. So we want to add that for pre-commit. We do a git status again. Again, you don't have to do that, but it will just say, yes, it's been, staged for commit. And then finally we do git commit with a message, and this time we'll say removed HTTPS redirection. Fantastic. Hit enter, do a git status. Nothing left to do. So all we need to do now, if you remember, is git push origin master. And that will push our Git repository back up to GitHub. Now, there's a bit of an issue. It failed. The reason it failed, if you actually read what it says here, it says the updates were rejected because the remote repository contains work that you do not have locally. Remember what that was? Yes, it's the Azure Pipelines YAML file. So what we simply do is git pull to merge the changes from the GitHub repository down to our local repository, and it kind of merges and kind of checks to see what changed in both places, so we have a consistent copy. So we then simply have to do a git push origin master once again, and it should work this time. And you'll also notice that we have an Azure Pipelines YAML file following the git pull in our project. There you go. And we can now edit that in VS Code. So we did the git pull, brought down the YAML file, resolved the differences between the two repositories, and then we've pushed up our change, which was to take out HTTPS redirection from our project. Now if we jump over quickly to Azure DevOps, what you should see is a triggered build. So you'll see another build being triggered, hopefully anytime soon. There we go, one new build. Click on that. And you can see it's building now. That should succeed. So you can see that build obviously succeeded. Just like the last one, there was just a minor code removal, but the point being that it was triggered from pushing our code up from our workstation, which is wonderful. What the build pipeline isn't doing, as I said earlier on, is that it's not running our unit test suite. Now a build pipeline that doesn't do any testing is really almost kind of worthless, because it just means you're effectively pushing code. You could just be pushing code into production without doing any kind of testing. So it's absolutely key that you do that testing component. So we're going to rectify that now. And where we do that is in our YAML file. Now, because we did that git pull and we pulled the YAML file down into our project, we can edit it in VS Code, or alternatively, if you prefer, you can do it directly in Azure DevOps in the web browser. So over to our Azure Pipelines file, and we're going to actually insert a task before our build. So we want to run the tests before we run the build, which makes sense. You don't want to build it and then test it. So I might fast forward. I'll type this in, but I might speed it up so you don't have to sit there and watch me typing, and I'll explain what it does when I've finished. Okay, hopefully you didn't find that too painful. Basically, it's kind of interesting. So they use these things called .NET Core CLI commands, basically. So you can see down here, we used a script command to run a .NET Core build, but instead for testing, and this is just through the research I did, it requires you to use this .NET Core task type that you then pass in commands. So we're passing in the command test. So it's like typing .NET test. You can pass in a projects flag, and we're basically just telling it that we want to run the tests in our test project. And I'm just using some short codes or shortcuts to get to our project path. And then we're just passing in the build configuration, which is release. And then it will, assuming that's successful, it will then skip on to the build component. So I've saved that file. Let's do a git status. Again, as expected, we have one modified file, which is our Azure Pipelines file. So let's git add that. I can do a git status just so you can see what it looks like. And then we're going to do a git commit mswitch with some details. So we'll say updated YAML file to run tests. Now hopefully I typed it in correctly. So that's all good. We do a git status, it's all good. We then do a git push origin master, which pushes it back up to GitHub, which should trigger a build, which should now execute our tests. So fingers crossed. So that pushed up okay. If we go over to GitHub and do a refresh, you will see that the Azure Pipelines YAML file should contain my changes. It does, that's wonderful. So that's been reflected here. And then we click on our build pipelines. Once it's registered that commit, that push, then it will trigger another pipeline build, and hopefully it will run our unit tests. And hopefully they should be successful. So yes, if we just go back down there while that's working, if we change back into our test directory and do .NET test, our tests pass locally, so they should certainly pass on the build server on Azure DevOps. So we can see we've got a new build and it's starting to build. So let's see what happens. Okay, so our build has completed and it's green, which is a very good sign. So if we click on that, you will see that there is another step in here, .NET Core CLI, which is the step we added. You can see here it took almost 2 minutes to run. So if we drill into that, you'll actually see down here that it was executing our tests. So you can see here, as it showed us on our local desktop, total of 2 tests, 2 passed, 0 failed, fantastic. And it even, which is really nice, it actually gives you a nice dashboard that you could put up on a plasma screen or a LED screen in your team environment that actually shows you the status of the test outcomes, and you can actually look at that. All very nice. So what we've just done is we've just added the step to our YAML file that enables us to run our unit test suite Next, what we're going to do is we're going to break our unit tests just to prove that it will be reflected back up in Azure DevOps. So we'll do that next. So let's break our unit test. So we can do it quite simply by going into our API project and going into our controller and simply changing the value that we're expecting in our unit test. So we'll change it from my name to the name I always wish I had, which was the name Homer gave himself in one of the episodes where he changed his name to Max Power. I thought that was pretty good, you know, when the Simpsons were definitely at their peak. So we're in our solution folder. Let's do a .NET build. That will build both projects. They should both build. So even though the point to make here is the code is still okay, the project is still building, there's nothing syntactically wrong with the API project, it's still fine. But if we change into our testing project and we run the tests there, the .NET test, it will fail. Okay, so the code is fine, the build is passing, but our unit test suite is failing. Okay, and we're just going to push that up to Azure DevOps. So let's change back into our solution directory, do a git status. Of course, we'll see values controller has changed, so we'll do a git add everything, and we'll do a git commit broken unit test. And we'll do a sad face, not with a wink, just a sad face. And we'll do git push origin master. Now, oh, misspelled that. Origin. There we go. Now, you may ask, and it's a really good question, why would you push code up to your repository if you've got failing unit tests? You're absolutely right, you wouldn't do that. We're just doing it as an example. That being said, there may be situations where you're working on an actual project and you can't run all your unit tests because maybe it's a huge piece of code, so you don't want to run all your unit tests. You can run small unit tests, and either individually or as you know, part of a group, and so you may only be testing a certain code, and you may only be running certain unit tests, but the code changes you've made may break or cause a unit test to fail somewhere else in your code. So you may be unaware that you've broken a test because you're maybe not running all the tests locally, and that's why something like a build server or CI/CD pipeline in the cloud is really useful, because it will run the entire unit test regression suite and pick up an error. Okay, so if we move over to Azure DevOps Pipelines, you can see that, yes, our CI/CD pipeline is in fact being kicked off again, and it's running through its steps, build and test steps. And obviously when it comes to doing the unit testing component, it should fail. So we'll wait and see, we'll wait for that to happen, just so you can witness it. And there we go, it's failed, as we expected. If we drill into it, you'll actually see the step that it failed at, and that is the step, surprise, surprise, where we are running our unit tests. So if we drill into that, it will probably give us a bit more detail. Yeah, one .NET failed return code 1. If we go back to our dashboard, it will also display the issue. There you go. So we've got 2 tests, one's failed, and we can drill down and have a look at why that's the case. So I just wanted to show that that was the case. Now, actually, before we move on, what we'll do is we will just revert this back to a passing state. And we'll just recommit the code back up. But we won't this time watch the build pipeline. I'm sure you have confidence now that it will pass. And let's do a happy face this time, smile. Okay, and then we'll do a git push origin master. Okay, so just wanted to show you that the testing is a critical part. If it fails in the pipeline, then the next step won't be executed. In this case, what is the next step going to be? The next step is going to be packaging up our successful build, ready for deployment. So let's do that now. So yes, let's do the package part of the pipeline, and you can probably guess where we're going to make our change in our build pipeline. Yeah, that's right, we're going to make it in our Azure Pipelines YAML file. Now you can see here we have the original script component that was in the file, which is basically doing our build. We added this task here to perform our unit testing, and now we want to add our packaging component. Now I actually did refer quite a bit to the Microsoft documentation. There's an MSDN article. Now I've actually linked to this article from my blog post, and there is a section on not building, not running tests, collecting code coverage, packaging and delivering your code. So basically I followed the instructions here. Now I'm going to type this code in. I'm going to fast forward through this through this bit of the video while I type it in, so it'll look like I'm typing super quick. I'll play some interesting music, and then once I finish typing, I'll come back and explain what's going on. So get ready, stand by, here we go. Okay, so that was probably as painful for you to watch as it was for me to type. I probably should have just pasted the code in, but hopefully as I typed it, you kind of understood what was going on. So basically we created two tasks effectively. The first one is just a .NET publish command, which you could issue at the command line yourself. And after we do the publish, basically package it up, we then zip up the artifacts ready to be actually published. So the last task is this publish build artifacts command, and that actually makes the artifact that we've zipped up and built effectively ready to be consumed by our release pipeline. So let's save that. We have saved that. Let's push it up to GitHub. It'll trigger the build process, and we'll look to see if it's all green. If it's all green, then we can move on to the next stage. So let's do that now. So again, standard workflow. Where are we? We're in our solution folder, so git status. There's only one file being altered, Azure Pipelines, fine, so we'll add that. We'll commit it. You're getting used to this by now, and our message will be updated Azure Pipelines to package build. Cool, and then we'll do a git push origin. If I can spell it correctly, faster, okay. There we go, it's getting pushed up to GitHub. Let's jump over to Azure DevOps and see, hopefully, fingers crossed again, that I typed that in correctly, that the whole pipeline runs and builds our build artifact. Or release artifact, should I say. Okay, here we go. So back into pipelines, back into builds. So while this is building, one thing I forgot to mention as we were covering this YAML file is in this task that we've added here, which is our publishing task, we are issuing a publish command via the .NET Core command line. Cool. This second, I guess, argument or switch here, publish web projects false. I spent a lot of time struggling with this step failing. And the reason it was failing, if you actually dig into the failure step, was because for some reason it assumes that it's a web project. Now, possibly because it's an API project, it does differentiate slightly between the two. I think if you are specifying that it's a web project, it expects certain directories to be there. With an API project, those directories are not there. I think that, from memory, that was the complaint, the error that it was giving. So you have to, if it's not a web project, which this one is not, you have to explicitly specify publish web projects as false. So take that away and hopefully save yourself 2 or 3 hours that I spent trying to figure out exactly what the problem was. The rest of it, again, is fairly straightforward, and of course this last step here, zip after publish true, means we have a zip file ready to be used by this last step, which is effectively our publishing our artifact step. So let's jump back over here. Fantastic, we've got a green tick. Let's just look at the steps. So publish artifact succeeded. The publish step as well actually succeeded too, which is what I was talking about. And that was the step that was failing when I did not have that, forgotten what it is now, when I didn't have this publish web project switch in there. So good news, that is our build pipeline complete with that final packaging step. So the next thing we need to move on to is our release pipeline that will take that artifact that we've zipped up and published and push it to Azure. Now, before we do that, we need to set up a resource on Azure. So let's jump over and do that now. All right, so let's move over to Azure now. I have it. I'm a bookmarked, but if you just go to portal.azure.com, that will take you there. I presume from memory, if I'm correct, if you don't have an account, it will just take you to the sign up page. Sign-ups for individuals are free, and you'll get a number of services free for the first 12 months, and there are also a number of services that are just free going forward. I think you may need to put a credit card in after your 30-day sort of grace period has expired, but don't quote me on that. It's been a while since I've done it. Now, with Azure, it's a vast subject. Literally in 20 seconds, Azure is a cloud platform that allows you to quickly provision resources. So a resource can be anything from a virtual machine instance to a database to an app, and we're actually going to create an app instance, an API app that just sits on Azure. So we don't really need to worry about, is it sitting on Windows, is it sitting on Linux or anything like that. We do configure the kind of hardware that we want, the kind of performance that we want, but we don't really need to worry about anything like that in much more detail, and it's instantly provisioned for you. Now, you'll see the plan that we are going to pick is a dev test plan, and we get free compute minutes for this particular thing. So it shouldn't generate any costs on your account. And typically what I do once I've finished with a resource, when I've finished playing with it, I'll either stop it or delete it. So if you follow this as I'm going to show you, it shouldn't generate any costings on your account. So over in Azure, we have a dashboard with a number of things we can create. So yes, here you are, you can create a virtual machine, you can create a SQL database, you can create all sorts of stuff. So we're going to create a new resource for ourselves. And the one that we want is API app. So if you start typing, this is the one we want, API app. And it gives you a bit of verbiage about what it is. So we will click on create. So we'll give our app a name. So I'll just name it after myself again as a narcissist, and we'll create a new resource group. Every time you create something in Azure, they want you to put it into a resource group, and a resource group is basically just a group of resources. So I already had a resource group there called Les Jackson, so I'm just going to put it into that existing one. If you are doing this completely from scratch, just type in anything you want there. It's not really that important as far as this tutorial is concerned. Now, what is important is this service plan. So let's click on that. And it's defaulted to a particular service plan, a plan that I don't want. It's too expensive for my tastes, and it's also in the wrong region. It's in central US. So I'm going to create a new plan. So I'm going to call it cheapo plan, because I want it to be free. I think you aren't allowed spaces, is that right? Okay, there you go. Location, so you can choose obviously where you want this resource to exist. Microsoft have a number of data centers around the world, so just pick the one that makes most sense to you. You'd possibly want to pick the one where the most traffic is going to be. In this instance, I'm going to pick Australia Southeast because that's where I am. And then possibly the most important thing is the pricing tier. So if we click on that, it will take you over to the different tiers. So you can have a production level offering, and you've got various catalog of things you can pick from there, how much memory, how big's the CPU, all that kind of stuff. You can even have something that's completely isolated on its own, so there aren't any other subscriptions that are utilizing that hardware. We're going to pick a dev test plan, and again, even within dev test, there's a number of pricing tiers within that. We're going to go for the F1 plan. Coincidentally, Formula 1 is coming to Melbourne this week. In fact, they're probably here already setting up for the Australian Grand Prix. So let's pick the F1 plan, and it just tells you it's shared infrastructure, 1 gigabyte of memory. We get 60 minutes a day compute for free. So that means that's how the charging model works. It works on compute minutes. We get an hour for free every day. So there's absolutely no way we're going to use more than that for this tutorial. So let's apply that. Click OK here, and we'll just make sure that our cheapo pricing plan has been selected, and we now click create. And Azure will go off and create that resource for us, and you'll get a little notification up here when it's done. There you go, deployment in progress. Now, while that's deploying, there is another way you can actually create this resource. So we went through a manual step-by-step process. We only have to do that once, by the way. So once this resource is created, that's it, it's created, and our Azure DevOps pipeline can push to it, multiple times. It doesn't get recreated. We don't have to intervene manually to recreate it, so it's done once. However, you can take it a step further and actually script up the creation of that resource that we did there. So rather than us manually going into the portal and creating it, you can script it, and I believe you can even trigger that scripting from Azure DevOps. So you potentially have a situation where it's totally automated and you're actually setting up the infrastructure that you need as well as part of your build process. So I've not done that on this occasion, but that is something I might do in a later video, or it's something you can do as a bit of homework yourself. If you are interested in that Google ARM templates, Azure Resource Manager template, so they're basically JSON files that dictate how your resources get created. So you can bake that in as part of your build process. So back over here, I think that has finished. Let's look at the notification. Yes, deployment was successful. Let's go to the resource. And it has started, so you can stop it if you want. You can obviously delete it at some point. It's even got a URL here that will take you to the resource live on the internet. So there you go, your app service is up and running. So within a couple of minutes, you have provisioned an API app on Azure that is accessible anywhere in the world. So it's really, really powerful. It's really, really cool. So we can now use this resource as our endpoint for our release pipeline. Okay, so our resource is created on Azure. Let's jump back over to Azure DevOps and create our release pipeline. So under pipelines, we click releases, new pipeline, and it will pop up with this number of templates that we can use. Coincidentally, the first template that's popped up, Azure App Service Deployment, is exactly the one we want. So let's click apply on that. And it comes up with this concept of a stage, which you can see in this kind of, you'll see it more clearly in a minute in this designer at the back there. But we'll give the stage a name. You can call it anything you like, but try and call it something meaningful. So we'll call this deploy to prod Azure. Okay. Now I find this interface a little bit clunky. In order to get to this box, we have to close this down. But in my mind, that's kind of almost as if you're cancelling out of it, but we're not really. So click here, and that brings us back to the stage. I don't really like that. And you can see here that there's a problem with this particular stage with one of the jobs and one of the tasks within it. So let's drill into that. Now, what it's asking for basically is an Azure subscription. So we're saying we want to deploy to Azure. It's saying, okay, cool. Where? Now, at this stage, clearly Azure DevOps and Azure, although they've got Azure in the name, are completely separate entities. I'm in fact using the same Microsoft account for both, but it's not, they've not joined those together yet. So anyway, you select your subscription. I already have mine in here. And it still asks me to authorize, so I already had that in there. If you don't have it in the drop down, you will have to basically provide your Azure subscription by signing in. So I still have to authorize. You just get the Microsoft sign in, so I'll just type in my credentials here. Password, which is already saved. Cool. Let's just make this, okay, that goes away, and this should authorize, okay, assuming I've put the password in correctly. Okay, that looks okay. And then it's asking for the app type. Now, we created an API app on Azure, not a web app. So there we go, select API app. And then it's asking us for the app service name. So what should happen, because we've selected a subscription and we've told it what app type it is, it should go off to our Azure subscription and find all the API apps that we have configured. So let's click on the drop down, and there you go. If you remember when we created it, we called it Les Jackson. There you go. So that's all good, and all those errors that were pinging up have been resolved. So let's click save. It asks us for a save folder. I just use the default one at this stage. Okay. So let's go back to release pipeline. So we have a new release pipeline. I wanted that to take me back to the designer, so that's a little bit strange. Let's edit this one. Yep, okay, that's a bit clunky. So this is the stage that we just created. What we then need to do is add an artifact. Now the artifact is the output of our build pipeline. So if we just do add an artifact, what do we want to add? We want to add a build. What project? Well, it's in the same project that this pipeline is being created in, and then we look for the source of that build pipeline, and here we are. It's the build pipeline that we created. Now it's asking what version do we want. So we want the latest. So every time we create a new build, we want to publish that build out to Azure, and then it's just asking for a source alias. I think that all looks good. Let's click add. And then the last thing we want to do is this little continuous deployment trigger. So as I mentioned at the start, you have continuous integration, cool, and then you have either continuous deployment or continuous delivery. Now, continuous delivery is taking us up to the point where we can publish our artifact manually at a push of a button. Continuous deployment is where what we're going to do now, where we actually trigger the deployment automatically all the way through. So we want to activate that here, and by default it's turned off. Okay, so here you go, continuous deployment trigger, we want to enable that. Not sure what that error is. I've seen it before, I just tend to ignore it. It doesn't seem to have any impact. So let's click save. You can put a comment in. I think possibly because you're saying you've enabled automatic or continuous deployment to out to Azure, and they maybe want to put a comment in there. So we're done. So that is effectively our release pipeline set up. So we have our artifact that's the output of our build pipeline. We've set up our continuous deployment trigger, and we only have one stage, which is basically pushing that deployment out to Azure, and we've specified the endpoint and the Azure subscription and the API app that we want. So if all has been done correctly, we are now ready to push our build out to Azure production. And what we're going to do is we're going to trigger a build on our desktop, and it hopefully will propagate all the way out to production Azure. So just to labour the point, let's go back to our app service. Let's just put in API values just to prove a point. This should return nothing. So we've not actually deployed our app onto Azure yet. The app is running, but there's nothing there. So I'm just showing you there is nothing there. So back over in our API application, we're going to push a build up to GitHub, as I just said. So what we're going to do is we're going to trigger or change these values in one of these action results. Let's change it to something like .NET as our first value and playbook as the other. I lied, I said I wasn't going to mention my blog again. I lied, that's what my blog is called, .netplaybook.com. In fact, let's not bother. So we've changed one file, let's do a git status. Yep, my values controller's changed, so we'll git add to add that for our commit. Git status again, it's ready to be committed. Git commit message, and we'll say changed return values. Okay, and now we do git, I think this should be our last git push, origin master. Fingers are getting tired. To trigger our build pipeline, which will then trigger our release pipeline, which should push our API into Azure production. It's exciting times. I can see you're clenching your teeth and your fists and everything else that can get clenched. So let's go over to our build pipeline first, and we should see that popping in here at some point, and we'll keep an eye on that. There we go. One new build, so we'll let that do what needs to do what it needs to do. Okay, so our build pipeline has completed. So you can see here our release pipeline is actually running, and it's saying it's deployed to prod Azure in progress, which is the name of the stage that we specified. Now I have found with this, unlike with the build pipeline, you can kind of watch it and then it will turn green. I have found with the release pipeline, you kind of have to navigate away from the page possibly to see whether this is completed. I'm sure they will change that in time, or maybe it's just me, I don't know, but I found it seemed to be taking an awfully long time to deploy, and then when I browsed away and refreshed, it's been deployed. So I'm not sure if they've got that down. Anyway, this is exciting times. It's our first deploy to Azure, and hopefully it will succeed. It's looking good so far, so let's keep our fingers crossed. Let's just navigate away, navigate back. Yeah, there you go. So it had deployed, it just needed the page to refresh. So you can see here, deploy to prod Azure has succeeded. Guess we can click on that and you can see, yeah, the step has succeeded there, which is looking pretty good. So the final test then is to go back to live Azure, and if you remember, trying to resolve this did not work. So let's try it again. Not only did it work, but it actually is using the new values that we had put in here. So what we have proven is that we can write our code down on our desktop. We can publish it to GitHub. We can run it through a release pipeline, a build pipeline first. Build it, test it, package it ready for deploy, and then push it straight through into a production Azure environment. I don't know about you, I find that technology incredibly impressive, and I've really just, scratched the surface and used a relatively simple example and joined the dots for you. So I'm hoping personally to take this and extend it out and play a lot more with Azure and the capabilities of this particular product, and I hope that you also found the video useful in your first steps into Azure DevOps and CI/CD generally. So again, thank you so much for joining me and making it all the way through to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please give it a like, and if you haven't done already, please subscribe to the channel. And remember, click the little notification icon and you'll get email updates when I post up new content. Until then, thanks very much. Stay well, take care, and I'll see you next time.